If you're ready to unlock more better days, to take control of your health, to push past your limits and unleash your full potential, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. For over 2 decades, I've worked with elite athletes and high performers, helping them optimize their bodies, strengthen their minds, and recover from setbacks. Now I'm bringing that expertise to you through the Vitality Collective podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the science, strategies, and real-world solutions you can apply right away. Whether it's enhancing your physical performance, avoiding or recovering from injury, sharpening your mental edge, or simply feeling your best every single day. With insights from top experts and thought leaders, this podcast is designed to help you take action, feel better, and live the life that you deserve. Welcome to the Vitality Collective podcast, where every day is vital. Today I'm joined by Christina O'Connor, a registered dietitian and gut health expert from Pendulum Therapeutics. In this episode, we dive into the fascinating world of the microbiome and explore how trillions of microbes in your gut shape your metabolism, mood, immune function, and even cravings. Christina breaks down the role of GLP-1, explains the importance of butyrate-producing bacteria, and reveals why Akkermansia muciniphila might just be the most important probiotic strain that you've never heard of. If you're looking to optimize your gut health naturally and unlock lasting vitality, this conversation is for you. Let's get started. Everybody, Christina, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so excited to chat about the microbiome with you.
My pleasure. It's my favorite topic.
Excellent. Well, should be a good conversation then. Well, let's dive right in. I really want to give people, before we dive into the specifics, a high-level view of what exactly is the microbiome.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have trillions of different organisms living within the gut microbiome. So we have different microbiomes all over the body. We have the oral microbiome. We have the skin microbiome. And so my expertise is in the area of the gut microbiome. And so, like I said, there's trillions of different organisms that make up that ecosystem in the gut.
Yeah, so I think that people are generally becoming more and more aware of the gut microbiome, but super interesting. And I think not many people understand that there is a microbiome throughout your body and that it is just one big symbiotic relationship that we have with these colonies of bacteria in and around our body.
Yes, absolutely. You can think of it as a little creepy if you want. It doesn't creep me out because I know all of the incredible benefits that we get from these bugs. But yeah, they're living in us and on us and all around us.
I always like to creep out my clients by saying there's a trillion human cells in the body and about 10 trillion bugs on us. So we're about 1/10 human as we stand here. It's
Yes.
always an amusing little concept for me.
It's true.
Yeah. And so, you mentioned some of those benefits. Help us understand that a little bit. What are some of the things that are going on here with the microbiome and what they help us with in our body?
Yeah, well, it's really connected. That'll be a long conversation because it's literally connected to every single body system. It's connected to the brain. So we have the vagus nerve that goes along either side that connects, literally, it's like a super highway from your gut to your brain. And so what's happening around in your gut is also influencing what's happening in your brain. So everything from your mood to your cravings is all connected. It's also affecting our metabolism. So that's some of the work that we've been doing and I've been doing and researching. But our gut is directly related to some of the metabolic processes that happen in our bodies as well.
Wow, that's incredible. And so talk to me a little bit more about this gut-brain axis. So you mentioned the vagus nerve. Is that like a direct impact through the vagus nerve, or is there are other ways that these bacteria communicate with our brain?
Yeah, there are other ways, but the vagus nerve is sort of the most direct way. So, we're all familiar with GLP-1 these days,
Hmm.
but
Right.
GLP-1 is a hormone that's created in the gut that directly influences the brain. But neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, all of those things, there is a significant connection between the gut, and the communication goes along the vagus nerve. So it really is
Hmm.
like this super highway of information between the gut has been considered the second brain.
Wow. Wow, amazing. And I want to touch on GLP-1 for a second there. A lot of people know that phrase now. We hear it a lot. I don't think many people truly understand what it is. Could you just give us a real brief overview of what is GLP-1?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a hormone, glucagon-like peptide it's what GLP-1 stands for.
Hmm.
And it is a hormone that's actually made in the gut. And
Oh.
it influences brain health. It influences our cravings, our feelings of satiety. So that's your feelings of being full after you consume a meal. It's responsible for that cutoff switch when you
Hmm.
recognize, like, I've had enough, I've eaten enough food, the gas tank is full. It's responsible for those sensations in the brain. So GLP-1 is also associated with us being able to regulate our blood sugar, so our glucose response, having improved insulin sensitivity, having better insulin secretion in our bodies. It's related to all of those things.
Wow. Okay. So there's a whole ecosystem of impacts there. And so I think we can start to see where some of these medications being targeted are going to be having their impact.
Yes, absolutely. However you feel about the medications, we
Hmm.
are finding that they're doing some really incredible things. So not just weight loss, but in terms of brain health as well. So,
Hmm.
that just makes me go back to, well, the actual natural GLP-1 that our bodies
Right.
are creating. That's where I like to focus my
Right.
efforts, for myself and for patients. How do we get our bodies back to making its own GLP-1? If that's something
Hmm.
that we're supposed to be able to do naturally, then I want to give my body all of the tools that it needs to make it on its own, right? And to
Right.
function at its peak.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for clearing that up because I don't think people really understand that is a natural substance, that it's not just something that we can go and get from our doctors. Um, and so it's a bit of a diversion from where I was going to go right off the bat, but let's keep this train going because it's super interesting.
Yeah.
How do we then create that environment for our bodies to naturally create this GLP-1?
Yeah, so tying it back into those trillions of organisms that live within the gut, one of their many functions is to help the gut make its own GLP-1. So we'll get a little sciencey for a second. I'll
Hmm.
try to break it down and use some analogies. But there are a particular class of bugs called butyrate producers.
Hmm.
And so when we consume fiber, we are the host. And so we're hosting these organisms in the gut, and they need to be fed. They need fuel in order to survive. And so it's a mutually beneficial relationship, right? So we consume the
Hmm.
fiber, and those bugs ferment the fiber for us. And what we get out of that fermentation process is something called short chain fatty acids, and
Hmm.
specifically butyrate. It's an incredible currency within the gut microbiome. Butyrate is super beneficial for the health of our colonic cells. But
Hmm.
then also, butyrate is responsible for promoting the GLP-1 hormone in the gut. So our
Oh, wow.
intestinal cells have actual butyrate receptor sites. So when it's being produced in adequate amounts, it's able to bind to those receptor sites, the way that it should. And that binding relationship flips on the GLP-1 hormone. So if you can imagine, you don't have these organisms, therefore you don't have good adequate butyrate production in the gut. And so butyrate's not binding, GLP-1's not being turned on. And there's a variety of reasons why these bugs go missing. If you think about our environment, the air that we're breathing these days, the toxins in our food, in our water, pharmaceuticals that we take, not to mention antibiotics, right? They're killing everything indiscriminately. So all of these things have a negative impact on these beneficial strains. So as you can imagine, throughout the years, if you lose these organisms, then you lose your ability to make butyrate, and therefore you lose your ability to make GLP-1. And sort of the downstream effect of that is metabolic conditions. You're not making GLP-1, you're not able to maintain your weight, you're not able to maintain your blood sugar. So yeah, that's how it happens.
Wow. That's an unbelievable lesson for us there. I'm learning a ton as we're talking. This is absolutely fascinating. So you mentioned some of those factors that can disrupt our microbiome. I'd love to talk about how our microbiome can be in balance or out of balance. And what are some of the mistakes that you see people make in their diet that can lead to an unbalanced microbiome?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, these strains need fiber. And so it's our job to feed them what they need, their fuel source, in order for them to then give us back that butyrate, right? That gold, that currency that we need so much of. And so diet is a really critical piece of this. And I think we're finding more and more that if we're not feeding these organisms what they need, then they leave. They don't survive.
Right.
I don't know if they necessarily leave, but they can't survive without their proper energy source. So diet is a really big part of that. But then I really think we have to consider the toxins in our food. So, even though it's more expensive, I try as hard as I can to buy organic. You think about glyphosate and weed killer in our grains. It's probably even in our organic foods as well, but there's likely less of it. So I just try to avoid toxins in my food as much as possible, because I know that's having a negative impact on these beneficial bacteria.
Yeah, I think that's a particularly important one as well with the weed killers. Again, I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that the mechanism by which they work is as an antibiotic, essentially. And so as you consume those, even in small amounts, and they continue to accumulate, I can imagine, I don't think it's much of a stretch to see the negative impact that could have on our microbiome.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not something that you eat it and it shows up tomorrow, right? It's years and years of these toxins. And then the next thing we know, we have inflammation in the body. Right. And inflammation is the root of all disease. It just looks different in everybody, depending on your genetics and your predisposition.
Yeah. And I think that we'll have heard various terms around some of these things that you're talking about, from the fiber that we take in to the bugs themselves, and then to the butyrate. Three of those terms that we've come across and we hear our people talk about are prebiotic, probiotic, and postbiotic. So can you just run us through the meaning of those terms as it relates to what you were just talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the prebiotic is the food for the probiotic. The probiotic is the live organism that exists within the gut microbiome. And so the prebiotic is going to be that fiber, or in the case of like Akkermansia, a novel keystone strain, its energy source is polyphenols. So that would be the prebiotic for Akkermansia. And then the postbiotic, which is a fairly new term, is the byproduct of these organisms, consuming the polyphenols or the fiber. The result of that sort of interaction is the postbiotic. So the butyrate would be considered the postbiotic. What are we getting from these organisms, after we've fed them and they've metabolized that food? What then are we getting from that? And that's going to be the postbiotic. What benefit are we getting from these organisms?
And you mentioned another word there, polyphenol. How is that different than fiber?
Yeah, so polyphenols are your antioxidants, right? They're protecting from oxidative stress in the body, and they're found in things like, well, let's list the fun ones first. Chocolate has polyphenols in it.
Excellent.
Red wine has polyphenols. Things like red grapeseed, pomegranates are a great source of polyphenols. Green tea is a great source of polyphenols as well. And so Akkermansia is a really interesting, novel, sort of keystone strain that exists in the gut microbiome and very specifically needs polyphenols to exist and to thrive and to colonize and grow and to stick around. We see all the time, when patients are not consuming a diet rich in polyphenols, that Akkermansia, it's very sensitive and it just leaves.
That's really interesting and explains why I've always heard people saying green tea and things like yerba mate are so good for the gut. And that really makes that link. So again, thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
And it also, as you're talking there, I can really see that relationship between the prebiotic, the probiotic, and the postbiotic, and how we have to have that balance across the three, really, in order for them to continue existing in our gut. How then do we start this process if somebody's interested in improving their gut health? Where do we start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that starting with the diet, making sure that we're filling in all the gaps, right? And that's what I try to do with my own personal health. Where do, what key nutrients, minerals, vitamins am I missing, right? I want my body to have all of the tools that it needs to perform these functions like metabolism in the way that it should. So we know that, diet is a critical piece of that. And supplements. I think that it's hard to get everything from our diet these days. And so, picking out those critical supplements that you might need, for you. So there can be some testing that happens, stool testing. What does your microbiome look like? What are the organisms that make up your gut microbiome? Are they opportunistic? Are they pathogenic? Are they overgrown in some areas? Or do you have a good balance of these keystone and what's called commensal strains that are really health promoting? So I love to start with the diet and then, filling in any gaps that are missing with supplements, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and then of course probiotics if we find that, they're missing in the stool.
And so as we look at adding in a probiotic and fixing our diet, it seems like we would need to prioritize fiber, but I know that it can be difficult to go from 0 to 50 grams of fiber. That shouldn't necessarily be done in a day. So how would you recommend somebody build up and progress their fiber? Are there particular sources of fiber that are easier? or particular ways to measure our fiber intake as we go along?
Yeah, absolutely. So your fruits and your vegetables are certainly going to have skin on, right? That's
Hmm.
a great way to increase your fiber intake. We have these new prebiotic sodas on the market that
Right.
I absolutely love, and they're great if you have kids around that like want
Oh, interesting.
sodas. Yeah, it's and you're getting they actually have inulin, which is
Hmm.
a prebiotic fiber. It's the same fiber that we use in some of our supplements.
Hmm.
And so it's a great fiber, and it satisfies that sweet tooth, and it doesn't have a lot of sugar in it. So
Right.
so that's one way. But I wouldn't drink more than one to start, where you might be a little bit uncomfortable. But something that I've done recently, because I'm a registered dietitian, but I needed to take my own medicine, and so it was recommended to do chia water. And
Mm.
it's super easy. You just add like a tablespoon of chia seeds to your water. I put a little lemon and my Himalayan sea salt in there.
Uh-huh.
I mix it up and I drink that first thing in the morning.
Nice.
I
Yeah.
used to be like coffee with cream and sugar. And I realized like, that's just not good.
Right.
It's just not. Started wearing a CGM, and my CGM was like, yeah, no, that's not good. We don't like that. Your body does
Right.
not appreciate that. So I've taken my own medicine and I've added the chia water, and it's a great
Hmm.
way to get a boost. And then you can build up to, now I'm at the point where I do 2 tablespoons of chia seeds in water.
Right.
And yeah, my husband thinks it's super gross, but I love it.
Yeah, these are little hacks I think that are really personal, and I think really speak to get it in a way that works for you. I,
100%.
I don't think it's really easy to say, okay, well, just get 50 grams of fiber. If people don't have the food prep or the cooking skills to work with vegetables, that's a whole skill set in itself just to be able to implement that in your life. And so
Yes.
having some easier solutions, at least to start with, while we upskill, I think that's a great solution. And what about the variety of different fibers? Is there benefit in all different sorts of vegetables, or are we okay if we just have one favorite and we just stick with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have your insoluble and your soluble fiber. And one is to kind of bulk up the stool and help it to pass through the body. And then the other type of fiber is actually feeding these organisms. So things like green bananas. Sorry if you
Mm.
like the brown ones, but the green bananas will feed your gut microbiome in a better way. The chia seeds will actually feed your gut microbiome. Jerusalem artichokes, I know that's kind of weird and random, but
Mhm.
onions, those types of things will really feed those organisms and help us to create that butyrate and those postbiotics.
Okay, excellent. And so we can see then we're creating an environment where now the probiotics, the actual bacteria themselves, can start to thrive because they've got enough food coming in. They can thrive and proliferate. If we don't take that measure, let's say we don't add the fiber, but we start taking a probiotic. And I had this scenario recounted to me actually just yesterday, where somebody started taking a probiotic, initially started getting some tummy cramps, mild, and then after a few weeks of taking a probiotic every day, was starting to experience pretty serious tummy cramps, some diarrhea. Is that, do you think, a result of not adding the fiber in, or have you experienced that yourself with other clients that you have?
It's an interesting question. I don't think I don't fully know the answer to it. I know that for our supplements, our probiotics, we do add a little bit of that prebiotic fiber. So, like I mentioned, the inulin prebiotic fiber that's in some of
Yeah.
those, newer popular sodas, is also in our probiotic formulation. So you are getting some
Hmm.
with the probiotics. Um, It's a delicate balance, though, because some people really struggle to metabolize and use the fiber in a way, and it causes a lot of GI distress. Increasing the amount of fiber. Sometimes
Hmm.
I think that is related to the gut barrier being broken down, right? So
Hmm.
certain things that are in the gut, they're getting into systemic circulation, and the body recognizes that, or doesn't recognize it rather, and so there's a response, and so you're
Hmm.
having GI distress because you're having those issues with fiber. Healing the gut can actually help us to tolerate more of those foods that we
Hmm.
need, right? So, like, when you think about it, we're designed to have fruits and vegetables. Like, we should be able to eat those things.
Hmm.
So if we have a really restricted food list, of just a small food list of things that we can tolerate, that's probably a good indicator that there's something going on in the gut that needs to be healed. There's likely
Hmm.
some inflammation that exists, that could be helped by probiotics. For our particular probiotics, we recommend that it's best to take them with food, because the food bolus is protecting the capsule. The
Yeah.
strains that we're manufacturing need to do their work in the colon, so they need to survive digestion and make their way down there. I think that eating food will help with GI symptoms
Right.
when you're taking a probiotic. Yeah, and so the other piece of that is, I think that sometimes when we take these beneficial strains and we're in a state of dysbiosis, right, which that just means that there's opportunistic and pathogenic bugs they're overgrown, they're out of whack, right? There's too
Hmm.
many of them. When we take these beneficial strains that come in, and they're trying to restore balance, I do think that there can be kind of this hostile takeover, right?
Hmm.
And so I do instruct people that are more sensitive, or having GI symptoms, or they have food intolerances, to take a low and slow approach when they're
Hmm.
adding probiotics. And that's something that's new. Take one capsule, take a half a dose, every other day, just so that
Hmm.
your body and your microbiome can get used to them being there, and it's not a hostile takeover, right? It's not angry.
Excellent. And so if we're adding this in the right sequence, we've added some fiber, we're taking a probiotic. I've also seen supplements on the market where we can skip right to postbiotics and we can supplement butyrate. Is that something that you've done with clients, or that you think would be beneficial, perhaps as a mechanism on healing the gut before we get to maybe some of the earlier steps?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's also one that I don't really know the answer, if it's better to, or if it's the same, to take the actual butyrate as opposed to consuming the organisms whose job it is to manufacture butyrate in the gut, right? So when I think about how nature intended it, it would be to have the organisms, and for us to feed them fiber, and then for them to give us butyrate in return. That way, the organisms are living in the colon. The butyrate is being produced there in the colon, and so it's being utilized for the colonic cells. So everything is happening right where it needs to, for the maximum benefit. Whereas opposed to taking butyrate, we want to make sure that it can first survive digestion, right? Because it's going to be used in the colon. And then, of course, it has to make its way through the small intestine. So is it getting there? That would be the first piece. And, if it does make it there, it may have the same type of benefit, that, like you mentioned, and it may have some healing properties, so that we can heal the gut some and then introduce the probiotics like you're suggesting.
And what would be some of the other strategies that you've used to heal the gut? Because I think that this is a pretty hot topic right now, and there's all sorts of stuff out there on different cleanses and herbs and ways to heal the gut. What are
Yeah.
some science-backed ways that you've done this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just from my own experience, and having a little guy that had recurrent ear infections and, just had to have antibiotics, as a little guy, I was constantly looking for ways to reduce the permeability issues that I knew were going to come as a result of giving antibiotics. And so I'm big on bone broth. Like I just love it for gut healing. I mean, that this was for a little guy who couldn't take probiotics, right? He couldn't
Hmm.
swallow a
Hmm.
capsule. And
Right.
so, I was giving probiotics in the way that I could, but
Hmm.
um, really, I was at that point focusing on fermented foods, and all of the ways that you can get some of these beneficial healing bacteria
Hmm.
from our environment, and from good sources of collagen and bone broth. That's just some of the
Hmm.
like really dietary and like simple ways that you can
Yeah.
heal the gut.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up fermented foods. We're starting to see again more stuff coming on the market. We're seeing kombucha really having a moment. Is that effective in adding beneficial bacteria? There seems to be a decent amount of sugar that comes with them. So are we essentially just drinking a soda, or are we actually getting some benefit as advertised?
Yeah, so you do get a lot of benefit from fermented foods. I think that that's pretty well established. A lot of your lactobacillus strains come in your yogurts and your fermented foods. And you're right, like the shelves now you can get like fermented like pickled onions to just like
Uh-huh.
add to your salads, right? You don't even have to make it.
Right.
I don't know about you, but I'm too busy to like ferment food.
Yeah.
And it seems like a really like somewhat dangerous, weird process, right? That you like have to
Hmm.
be precise.
Right.
So yeah, it's nice that I mean I like cabbage and beets and like all these things are like fermented and like on the shelf now that you can just easily
Hmm.
add. And I think that actually too, that's going to increase the fiber, that's going to increase those beneficial strains, and it's also going to help with some of that GI distress. I think that people experience from having dysbiosis and having those strains out of balance. But yeah, you can get even just from your environment. A lot of the beneficial strains that are in probiotics come from the environment, come from playing in the dirt. Right? We live in such a
Hmm.
sanitized world now. We're like trying to go back to being exposed to more of these beneficial strains. So fermented foods is a really great way to get some of those.
Yeah, I think that time in nature that has really disappeared from our lives. I know growing up as a kid, you're always up to your knees in mud and digging around and doing stuff. And I think I see parents now really shielding their kids from that. Is that having a negative impact even on the gut microbiome?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's just no way that it can't. I mean, even like when you go back to the birthing process, the natural way that we're born is pretty messy, and you're basically inoculated with a whole
Hmm.
slew of mom's bacteria.
Hmm.
But when it's done, yes, some of us we have C-sections, and so that's incredible, right? We're able to bring
Hmm.
healthy babies into the world, and that's what's most important. But that environment is totally sterile, and so when
Right.
you're born into that, that definitely affects your microbiome. And so it's the same sort of thing. Like if we're living in a totally sterile environment, without some of these bacteria, then that plays a negative role in our health. There's
Hmm.
studies that they cause mice to just be completely germ free, right? They're totally sterile and they have absolutely no microbiome whatsoever. And these mice have just horrible health issues.
Hmm.
They have
Hmm.
no bacteria.
Yeah, it makes me immediately go back to the events of 5 or so years ago when we were just doused in alcohol spray, on every surface. It's really interesting to wonder how that played into our immune systems during that period, because And one of the big benefits that we've read about for a long time now is the benefits of probiotic supplementation on upper respiratory infections and coughs and colds and flus and all these things. What's the role there, do you think, of the microbiome in that? And I guess we go back to that sterilized environment that we were in a few years ago.
Yeah. So there are certain strains like Akkermansia for one of them, for example, helps to modulate the immune system. And so there are some very critical things that it's doing within the gut microbiome that help to boost the immune system. And so, yeah, so when you think about beneficial strains and you think about your resistance to colds and viruses, yeah, it's playing a huge role in that ability.
And of all these benefits, they're just building and building. And so one of the others that I've read about, and you alluded to it earlier with the different neurotransmitters, is actually mental health. And it'll go into that gut-brain axis a little bit, but can you talk about the mechanism of the gut and our mental health?
Yeah, there is so much interesting research that is coming out these days, talking about the links between the gut and the bacteria and our mental health. Akkermansia specifically, I can speak to that one probably the best, but it's been associated with being a GABA producer. And so GABA is associated with feelings of calm and less anxiety. And so when patients have certain levels of Akkermansia, you can see in the literature that they have less of the depression and the anxiety and just sleep better and have more feelings of calm.
Wow, that's incredible. Just from our gut microbiome, you wouldn't necessarily think that we've got all these different neurotransmitters that are being produced essentially by the microbiome.
Yeah, and you think about GLP-1 also. So, it helps with sort of that cravings center in the brain. So, and that extends beyond food and into alcohol, drug addictions, and even gambling. So it's playing a role in that center in the brain. So, you wonder if someone that struggles with addiction, maybe they don't have these organisms in the gut and they're not producing adequate amounts of GLP-1.
Wow, that opens up a whole field of medicine, really.
Yeah.
If you think about mental health and all these physical benefits that we're listing, I've thought for a while with my career in high performance sport that the gut was really the next frontier in medicine and in performance for that matter. We'd just started to understand it and that it was important and had started doing some testing on our athletes. But I really think that now we're seeing an acceleration here. And you've mentioned a couple of times Akkermansia. And this wasn't something I'd heard before I started reading about and taking Pendulum's probiotic. Can you tell us a little bit about why it's different and maybe why we hadn't seen it in our other probiotics that were on the shelves before this?
Yeah, absolutely. Akkermansia, an incredible organism. We've been talking a lot about, the organisms that we're getting in our fermented foods, the ones that we can, or lactobacillus strains that we're getting in our environment and playing in the soil. And Akkermansia is just as, if maybe not more beneficial than a lot of those strains, but it's not one that we can get from our foods. It's not one that we can get from the environment, can't get it from playing in the dirt. And part of that reason is because it's an anaerobic bacteria. So a single molecule of oxygen destroys Akkermansia.
Oh, wow.
So that's why it hasn't been available in a supplement form because, no one's figured out or taken the time maybe to figure out how to grow an anaerobic strain in an oxygen-free environment. And so that's something that Pendulum scientists, our founders and our CEO, they're all scientists who have their background in DNA sequencing, right? And so they've been looking at strains like Akkermansia. And when they noticed the incredible benefits and all the different body systems that it's related to, then the challenge became, well, how do we grow this bug? And initially they were relying on other labs to grow the Akkermansia for them, and everything that came back was dead. And so they realized, we're going to have to. This technology doesn't exist. We're going to have to invent new technology to grow anaerobic bacteria. So our manufacturing plant, we grow all of our own strains, and it's a completely closed chain system. So nitrogen is pumped in to keep the oxygen out. And so that's how we grow the Akkermansia. But I find it really interesting that breast milk is the only food that Akkermansia has ever been isolated in. So
is that right?
Yeah, I think my hypothesis is mom has Akkermansia, and then she's passing it on to baby through the birthing process, skin to skin, and breast milk.
Wow, that's fascinating. I had no idea. And I'm really interested then. Okay, so we've got to have this very specific process in place to create the supplement. I guess, how did the Akkermansia get in our bodies in the first place? Maybe it is through birth, but do we know what that mechanism is for it existing in our bodies, and does it exist in the environment elsewhere?
Yeah, not that we know of, not any places that have oxygen. And so I don't think we know how we came to have Akkermansia to begin with, right? But that has been sort of my thought. The more I learn about the strain and the more I learn about, the research and how it acts and how it behaves, I do think that it is coming from mom, that mom has good, adequate levels of Akkermansia during pregnancy, and then she's able to pass it on to baby. The best case scenario would be in a natural birth. And then, of course, breastfeeding.
Yeah. And so what we've seen, certainly in our practice with clients and within our community, is that Pendulum has really quickly become a favorite among physicians, among RDs, certainly what we recommend. What are some of the benefits, and why do you think that it's gained such momentum relatively quickly?
Yeah, so before Pendulum's existence, healthcare providers have been looking at this strain just because of all of its different, benefits for us as the host, in terms of metabolism, but then also in terms of reducing inflammation in the body. And so for the longest time, they've been trying to increase levels in their patients naturally. And you can do that by increasing the amount of polyphenols that you're consuming. So if let's say you have just a little bit of Akkermansia that's hanging on for dear life, you can actually increase polyphenols and encourage it to grow and colonize and thrive again within your gut microbiome. But yeah, it is one of those strains that we notice when it's missing, it has a lot of negative downstream effects. In terms of the gut barrier integrity. So it's really critical sort of for that relationship. So its full name is Akkermansia muciniphila. So it's a mucin-loving organism. And so when you think about your gut barrier, there's a layer of mucus that's sort of separating the inside of the gut and our circulatory system. And so Akkermansia is in there. It actually eats the old dead stuff. So that layer, it's just mucus. It has to be turned over every 5 to 7 days or so. And so when Akkermansia is present, it's eating up the old stuff. And when it does that, it stimulates our goblet cells to produce a new, fresh layer of mucus. So that barrier, I almost think of it as like fly paper, where toxins get stuck there. Pathogens pathogens, opportunistic bacteria, they all get stuck there, and they're not able to get into circulation and cause the inflammation in the body. But then there's also a significant, like we've been talking about, metabolic component to Akkermansia. So it helps to promote GLP-1 in a couple of different ways in the gut, and then yes, it's also helping to modulate the immune system as well.
That paints a really clear picture of how it protects us, but also keeps inflammation down. Because if we're keeping bodies that aren't supposed to cross into circulation, it's reducing our need for that immune response and that overall inflammation.
Yep.
And I'm assuming then that's a synergistic relationship with the production of butyrate, which I know also helps to close down the gaps that can appear in the intestinal wall. So it's helping create that double barrier, and
yes,
you get to
absolutely.
eat chocolate. So
yeah, absolutely. Yes. So one of the other really interesting strains in some of the Pendulum products, it's a strain called Clostridium butyricum. It is, just as its name suggests, it is a butyrate producing bug. But yes, it has been shown to help tighten the junctions between the cells. So we have we have two barriers. So you have that mucosal barrier on top, but then you have the layer of cells underneath that. And it's super important that those cells be tight together with no gaps. And so, yes, Clostridium butyricum is incredible for helping to tighten up those junctions because of the butyrate that it's producing. So I call that barrier 2. So you've got barrier 1, you've got barrier 2. Keep them both nice and healthy and tight, and you reduce inflammation in the body.
Incredible. And as you alluded to, that is such an important factor in the development of the chronic disease states, that we can really see how making sure that our gut is in a really good place, and that's being the center of our health journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's pretty clear now that all of our disease stems from some type of inflammation. And I really think it just depends on, you personally, your genetics, your makeup, your environment, how that inflammation is then going to present in the body.
Yeah. And one of the other things that we've also seen with Pendulum is the talk about glucose control. What's the mechanism there? Again, insulin resistance being one of those leading drivers of certainly neurological disease and cognitive decline.
Yes.
What's that mechanism?
Yeah, it actually all goes back to the short chain fatty acids and the butyrate. And so we combined Akkermansia with 3 other butyrate producing organisms. And in a clinical trial, that's another thing that makes Pendulum unique. We have research on our finished product. So it's the product that, we brought to the marketplace, and then we did a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial on that product. So if you don't know, that's the gold standard, right? It's completely free of bias. And we did the study in patients that had full-blown type 2 diabetes, and we wanted to see, can we give this grouping of probiotics, of beneficial strains, and have an effect on blood sugar in the long term? So we were looking at A1C, right? Like that's sort of your measure of, have your blood sugars been under control in the last 3 months? And then we also wanted to see, could we impact our blood sugar spikes after meals, like in the short term? And what we found was that patients that were taking the glucose control, they were able to lower their A1C significantly, comparable to what patients are able to achieve when they take metformin. So that was significant. And then we were also able to basically outperform metformin in terms of the after meal glucose spikes. So it's really fun if people wear a continuous glucose monitor, and they have insulin resistance or they have spikes after certain meals, and then you add the glucose control and you can really see in real time. One of our dietitians has a fun graphic of cheesecake at night without glucose control and cheesecake at night with glucose control, and it really does manage the spike. Yeah, and so these strains are, again, they're working to create that short chain fatty acid, the butyrate in the gut, and again, that butyrate can bind to those cells and turn on that GLP-1 hormone. It really is all about GLP-1, and this is not something that Pendulum just jumped on the GLP-1 bandwagon because everybody else did. This is the work that we've been doing since our inception 15 years ago.
Right.
When the rest of the world wanted to start talking about GLP-1, we were thrilled,
Right.
we have the answer, like, naturally. This is the research, this is the study that we've done to prove that these organisms really can help with glucose regulation. And that's proven in the study. So it's really exciting.
It's super exciting. And for people who start this journey, how long can they expect to be working on this before they start seeing these benefits we've outlined?
Yeah, so our glucose control study took 3 months. So we recommend that anybody that's taking our products or using our strains, that they give it a full 3 months before they say, oh, it didn't work. Because it takes time to make meaningful changes to the gut microbiome. So you really have to be patient. Some people notice results, or they'll notice a change in stool consistency, or they'll notice a change in their satiety, the feelings of fullness, or they'll notice a change in food cravings. But giving it that full 3 months really helps the strains to kind of take effect and work their magic.
And that's 3 months of daily use?
It is, yeah. So our glucose control product, in the study, those type 2 diabetics were taking it twice a day.
Right. Oh, wow. Okay. And with a meal?
Yes. Yeah. So, and that just helps to protect the capsule because it needs to travel down to the colon. So we recommend with food for all of our products.
Right. That's awesome. And one of the other things as we get close to time here that I really want to put out there is, you'd mentioned before antibiotic use. Obviously that's pretty prolific in our Western society. Is there a way that people could be thinking about using, for example, a pendulum type product in conjunction with a course of antibiotics? Because often you can think of it as being a little counterproductive. So is there a way that we can really use them to our benefit as we're on a course of antibiotics?
Yeah. And I used to be in the camp of take your probiotics once you finish your course of antibiotics, because they were kind of canceling each other out. And it's probably a waste of money to add probiotics at the same time because the antibiotics are just killing it. But there's new research actually that shows that if you're cycling them, right? So you're taking maybe your antibiotics during the day and then you take your probiotics right before bed, right? When everything is working its magic in the body. It's cleaning, it's repairing.
Right.
And there is a protective benefit to taking probiotics when you're doing your course of antibiotics. So number one, it helps to protect against some of those symptoms that you might experience when taking antibiotics. And then the research also showed that the amount of beneficial bacteria that you lose if you take the probiotics at the same time as the antibiotics is less. So you actually protect some of these species if you're taking the probiotics at the same time. So I've totally reversed my position, and I now recommend probiotics at the same time.
Excellent. Well, we will certainly make sure that is spread as the message now. And to close here, Christina, what are 3 takeaways that you would like people to have from this episode that they could get started right away? And I'd like to target this as well to people who may not have access to Pendulum, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. And so as a dietitian, I think that it's critically important to focus on the diet first, right? Before supplements, before taking anything or adding anything, trying to get all of your nutrients as best you can from a well-balanced diet that's giving you vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and protein. And then sleep. That's a free one. We can
Right.
all improve our sleep hygiene.
Yeah.
Yeah, so getting enough sleep, like we just talked about, like there's so much cool stuff that's going on in the body while we're sleeping. It's
Right.
repairing, it's storing our memory. It's cleaning our cells. So you're giving yourself the best boost possible by getting good quality sleep. All right, let's see. You asked for a third thing.
You're on the spot.
What brings you joy, right? Like, I mean, mental health and
Yeah.
happiness, that's a big part of the picture. So go out
Yes.
there and make yourself be happy.
I love that. I love all of those. You're really speaking our language here. We chose Vitality Collective for that reason, right? We don't just want people living longer in these like boring, sterile lives. We want full, complete lives that people just love. And
Yes.
so I think that reducing stress, talk about that as a benefit for the microbiome, just
Yes.
reducing stress and loving your life. I
Yes,
think it's just
absolutely.
incredible.
Yeah. And I've recently learned, like, reducing stress, it's not really achievable or attainable, but I can manage my stress better,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The way that I react to stress or approach stress,
Mhm.
or the way that I care for my body, that is something that I have control over.
Right. Yeah. And we're all about the things you can control. We can spend a lot of time worrying about the stuff that we can't control, but to what end? Can you talk to some of the negative effects of stress on the microbiome?
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely affects the gut permeability situation. So we know that stress makes the gut more permeable. We
Uh,
know that the beneficial bacteria don't do as well in a stressful environment. So whatever steps that we can take to reduce stress, even just deep breathing a couple of times a
mhm.
day. I always ignore my Apple Watch when it says like it's time to do deep breathing.
Yeah.
But more recently, I've really made the connection to how deep breathing can reduce the amount of stress in the body, and then it has all of these other positive benefits on the gut microbiome, for just to mention one.
Yeah.
So that's huge.
Yeah, we focused with one of our other guests a couple of weeks ago, Brian Ferguson, on the physiological side. So
Yeah.
2 inhales and a slow exhale. You
Yes.
do 2 or 3 of those. He says they try and get the high performers they work with to go do that 5 to 7 times a day, and just
Yes.
notice a huge change in heart rate and HRV and all these other factors simply by putting in that. You can do that pretty subtly. You don't need to go and meditate. Just 2 really
Yeah.
quick inhales and a slow exhale.
Yes, yeah, because our world today is telling all of us that we're being chased by a bear, right? And that is
Yeah,
just not sustainable. So yeah, we got to like get into that calm place of like, hey, it's okay. You can digest your food, you can relax, you're not being chased by a bear, everything's okay.
right. Would there be an increase in supplementation with Pendulum under a high stress period of time?
So are you saying like if you are super stressed, like should you increase the amount of probiotic
Mhm.
supplementation?
Yeah, given that it's creating that tough environment for it.
Yeah, I think I would. We haven't studied it. There are so many things that we want to study.
Mhm.
We are doing. We're not doing it, but someone else is looking at our glucose control and bipolar depression.
Oh
So,
wow.
so yeah. So there's so much more to discover. But, whenever I talk about these strains, I'm always reminded like of all of the incredible benefits. And I'm like, oh yeah. I got to take that one.
Yeah. Christina, this has been so much incredible information. Where can people find Pendulum and the work that you all are doing?
Yes, absolutely. Our website is probably the best place, pendulumlife.com. You can read more about the finished research that's been conducted on our products. And you can also read more if you're super sciencey and nerdy. You can also read about the studies that I mentioned that are up and coming. Like I mentioned the bipolar depression. We have one in postmenopausal osteoporosis. And then we're also doing a study in obesity. And these are actually not our studies. These are studies that others are doing that are super interested in our strains. So yeah, we have information there for consumers, patients, healthcare providers. It's a lovely website.
Outstanding. Well, we'll make sure that people get access to all of that. We'll put it in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for your time today. This has just been unbelievable.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That was a fascinating conversation with Christina O'Connor on the microbiome's impact on our health. Here are 3 takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, GLP-1 is naturally made in the gut. It plays a powerful role in satiety, blood sugar regulation, and brain health. Supporting natural production through fiber and butyrate-producing bacteria is key. Number 2, Akkermansia muciniphila is a game changer. This rare and vital probiotic strain helps maintain gut barrier integrity, reduce inflammation, and regulate metabolism. Number 3, diet, sleep, and joy are foundational. A fiber-rich, polyphenol-packed diet, quality sleep, and joyful lifestyle are all crucial for a balanced microbiome. If today's discussion resonated with you, and you're looking for ways to integrate early detection, personalized health strategies, and strength-based longevity into your own life, we would love to help. At Vitality Collective, we've built these principles into a comprehensive system designed to optimize health and performance at any stage of life. If you're ready to take action and see how this approach could work for you, visit www.vitality-collective.com to learn more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.